I just miss her so much.
He laughed at me like I was a joke, like the man who raised him wasn't even worth respect. It wasn't just a laugh. It was sharp, deliberate, echoing through the room full of his friends, each one joining in like they were in on some cruel, inside joke. I stood there still holding the dish I'd spent hours preparing, my hands trembling slightly, not because I was angry, but because I was shattered. In that moment, I wasn't his father. I was just the man he was ashamed to introduce, the man he mocked to get a few laughs, and he knew I heard it. He looked right at me afterward. No apology, no recognition of the weight of his words. Just a shrug and a smirk that cut deeper than any insult ever could. My whole life I've sacrificed for that boy, missed out on sleep, opportunities, even friendships, just to give him a life better than mine. And this was the thanks I got. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door or throw the plate or make a scene. No. That day I chose silence. A silence so loud it would echo in his life for weeks. Because sometimes the loudest lesson doesn't come from shouting. It comes from absence. From stepping back and letting someone feel the weight of what they've broken. I knew then that something had to change. Not just for me, but for him. He needed to understand that love isn't a guarantee. Respect isn't automatic. And when you take people for granted, they might not always be there when you finally realize what you lost. My name is William. I grew up in a small, drafty house on the edge of a rural town that most people couldn't find on a map. Winters were harsh, no central heating, just a wood-burning stove that didn't quite reach the corners of our home. I remember going to sleep with socks on my hands just to keep warm. Hand-me-downs were all I knew. Shirts too big, pants rolled at the ankles, holes patched with old fabric and thread. We didn't have much, but my mother made it work with what little we had. My father left when I was 7, and from then on I learned what it meant to grow up fast. I got my first job at 15, sweeping the floors at a mechanic's garage after school and on weekends, saving every dollar I could dot. That was my childhood, quiet, tough, and built on necessity. But from those years of struggle came a kind of strength too. I learned discipline, sacrifice, and the kind of pride that comes not from wealth but from hard work, and staying true to your word. I knew I wanted more for my future, even if I didn't know what more looked like. College wasn't an option, so I worked, harder than I ever thought I could. I picked up every shift I could find, learned how to fix things, how to build with my hands, how to live without complaining. And through it all, one thing kept me going. The dream of having a family, of being the kind of father I never had. When my son Caleb was born, that dream finally became real. I held him in my arms and made a silent promise. He would never have to live the way I did. He would never have to worry about heat in the winter or food on the table. He would never wear shoes with holes in them or wonder why his father didn't come home at night. I would be there for him no matter what it cost me. That promise shaped every decision I made from that day forward. I took on extra jobs, working long hours at the construction site during the day and doing handyman work around the neighborhood in the evenings. I'd come home with sore muscles and cracked hands covered in dust and sweat just to cook dinner and help Caleb with his homework before bed. I missed a lot. School plays, birthdays, even a few doctor's visits. Not because I didn't care, but because I was out making sure the light stayed on and the roof didn't leak. Every sacrifice I made with love. I wanted Caleb to have choices. I wanted him to dream without limits, to stand on solid ground built by my own hands. I taught him the value of money early on, not by lecturing, but by showing. When he asked for the newest shoes, I explained how many hours I'd have to work to afford them. Sometimes I gave in. Most times I didn't. I didn't want him to feel deprived. I wanted him to understand. We weren't poor anymore, not the way I was as a child. But I never wanted to raise a boy who felt entitled to anything. I believed in honesty, humility, and gratitude. I thought if I led by example, he'd follow. And for a long time, I believed he was. Caleb was a good kid growing up, polite, thoughtful, always curious. We had our routines. Saturday mornings were for pancakes and car washes. Sunday afternoons, we'd walk the park trails together, talking about everything from video games to life lessons. I still remember the time he got his first A in math. He ran into the house holding that paper like he'd just won the mighty lottery, and in my eyes he had. I was proud of him, so proud. And maybe that pride made me blind to the slow changes happening right in front of me. As he got older, I started to see shifts. Subtle things at first. He'd roll his eyes when I offered advice. He started leaving the house without saying goodbye. He didn't ask for help anymore, not because he didn't need it, but because he didn't want it from me. I tried not to take it personally. Teenagers pull away, I told myself. It's part of growing up. Still, every time he chose silence, over conversation, every time he looked at me like I was something outdated or out of place, it chipped away at something inside me. I thought maybe it was just a phase. I hoped it was Dot. But over time, his world and mine started to drift apart. He made new friends, kids with expensive shoes, the latest phones, designer backpacks. Their parents drove Teslas and worked in offices I'd never stepped foot in. And suddenly, I wasn't just his father. I was an embarrassment. He stopped inviting me to his school events. He started making excuses not to be around. I could see it in his eyes. He was ashamed of me. And no matter how many hours I worked, no matter how much I provided, it wasn't enough to make up for the fact that I didn't fit into the image he wanted to project to the world. Still, I held on. I told myself respect wasn't something I had to demand. It would come eventually from everything I had given. But deep down, I felt the disconnect growing. Our dinners became quiet. Our weekends disappeared. And then, one afternoon, everything I feared was confirmed in a single, humiliating moment. That moment when Caleb made a joke at my expense in front of his friends, mocking the very life I'd built for him, was the day I realized something had to change. I never wanted perfection. I didn't care about fancy clothes, flashy cars, or big houses. I just wanted to raise a son who respected the hands that fed him, a son who understood that behind every bill paid, every warm meal, and every safe night's sleep, there was a man who gave everything he had without ever asking for praise. All I ever asked for, quietly, patiently, was respect. But the moment he laughed, it became clear. He didn't see me, not really. Not as a man, not as a father, not as anything more than a relic of a life he thought he'd grown beyond. It was a Saturday afternoon when Caleb told me he was bringing a few friends over. I remember feeling a flicker of excitement, like maybe this was a chance to connect, to bridge the growing gap between us. I hadn't met many of his new friends. I knew their names from passing mentions, the kind of half-hearted conversations you have with a teenager who's always halfway out the door. But still, part of me hoped that maybe this would be the day I'd see a little of the boy I used to know. Maybe we'd sit down for dinner together, like old times. Maybe they'd realize I wasn't so bad. I wanted to make a good impression, not with anything fancy, just with food, warmth, hospitality, things I thought still mattered. I started early, putting together a homemade meal, the kind Caleb used to love when he was younger. Baked chicken, seasoned potatoes, a bit of cornbread on the side. Nothing extravagant, but real food, made with care. I even took out the old tablecloth we used to save for special occasions. I wanted the house to feel warm, inviting. Maybe it was foolish, but I wanted to be part of his world, if only for an evening. I set extra plates, wiped down the counters, and even changed into a clean shirt. As I moved around the kitchen, I heard the front door open, followed by the unmistakable thump of sneakers and the sound of unfamiliar voices. Laughter, jokes. Caleb's voice. Louder, more confident than I was used to hearing. They didn't come into the kitchen. They stayed in the living room, talking among themselves while I finished up. I figured maybe they'd come in when the food was ready. I didn't want to interrupt, so I kept working, listening from just around the corner. That's when I heard it. One of the boys asked, "Hey, is that your dad in there?" And Caleb, he laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a proud laugh, a laugh that sounded like he'd been waiting for someone to ask that question. "Oh, him?" he said. Yeah, that's just my dad. He's simple. Small town vibes. He still uses a flip phone. The room erupted with laughter. I froze. I stood there, a spoon in one hand, the scent of roasted chicken in the air, and that sentence ringing in my ears. He's simple. Simple. Like I was beneath them. Like I was some outdated version of a man he didn't want to be associated with. And the flip phone, yes, I still used one. Not because I didn't know better, not because I was stuck in the past, but because it worked and because I didn't see the need to spend hundreds of dollars on something that changed every year. I had my reasons, but to him, it was a punchline. I wanted to believe he didn't mean it, that maybe he was just trying to fit in. The teenagers say dumb things, but then he looked over right at me. Our eyes met. Just for a second. He knew I had heard. He knew I was standing there. And still, he said nothing. No apology. No embarrassment. No flicker of regret in his face. Just a quick glance away, like I was something he had to endure. That moment hit harder than I ever could have prepared for. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so casual. So easy for him. Like he'd already made peace with the idea that I wasn't worth his respect. I wasn't angry, not right away. I was numb, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I turned off the stove, slowly, and just stood there for a minute. My hands, rough from years of work, were trembling. Not from rage, but from heartbreak. All. The memories rushed in. Late nights holding him when he had nightmares, building his first bike from scratch, working overtime to get him the laptop he wanted for school. I'd gone without more times than I could count. I'd swallowed my pride, taken on jobs that broke my back, and faced every hardship life threw at me with one thought. It's for him. Every day, every sacrifice, every choice, I made them to build something better for Caleb. And in one moment he reduced it all to a joke. I didn't walk into that room. I didn't confront him or demand an apology in front of his friends. I didn't raise my voice or make a scene. I just stood there behind the kitchen wall, listening to their laughter fade and twist into something bitter in my ears. They went back to their conversation, moved on like nothing happened. But for me, time stopped. Something shifted inside me. A part of me, one I didn't even realize could still be hurt, was broken. After a few minutes, I walked out quietly and left, their dinner on the stove. I went into my room and closed the door. I heard them leave later, the door slamming shut behind them, and Caleb didn't say a word to me that night. No, thanks for dinner. No, sorry. Just silence. Like nothing had happened. But something had happened. A line had been crossed. And as I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I couldn't keep pouring my heart into someone who didn't value it. I couldn't keep showing up for someone who was only proud of me when no one was looking. Respect isn't something you can demand, but it is something you can walk away from when it's missing. That moment, quiet, humiliating, deeply personal, wasn't just about what he said. It was about everything it revealed. And I knew then with painful clarity that things couldn't stay the same. I didn't confront him. I didn't yell. No storming into the living room, no slamming doors or tearful accusations. I just stood still that night, quiet in the hallway as Caleb went on like nothing had happened, laughing again, this time over some video game with his friends while I sat in the dark, invisible in the very home I built. I realized there was nothing I could say in that moment that would fix what had cracked inside me. I had spent years thinking love and effort alone were enough to command respect. That if I just kept showing up, sacrificing, doing the right thing, that he'd eventually see it. But he didn't. And maybe that was my mistake, believing he would learn simply by watching, by absorbing the example I tried to live. So that night, while he slept, I quietly packed a small bag, a few clothes, my tools, a toothbrush. I didn't take much, just what I needed to get by. I stood in the doorway of his room for a moment, watching him sleep. He looked peaceful. Innocent, even. Just like he did when he was 5, curled up with a blanket, breathing steady and safe. I felt the weight of love and heartbreak pull at me at the same time. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Nothing dramatic, just a few words he'd understand when he finally woke up. Gone for a while, take care of the house. And by morning, I was gone. I didn't have a plan. I just needed space. Needed him to feel the emptiness I had been feeling for months. I moved into a small apartment downtown, the kind of place you'd pass without noticing. It had peeling wallpaper, a window that overlooked a noisy street, and a heater that coughed more than it worked. No family photos, no decorations, just bare walls and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe you, but reminds you of everything that once filled a space now empty. At night, I'd lie awake and still hear his voice. He's simple. Small-town vibes. I could hear the laughter trailing. Behind it, haunting the edges of my mind like an old echo that refused to fade. I tried not to let it consume me, but the truth was, I missed him. Despite everything, I missed my son. But I needed him to miss me too. I needed him to notice the absence. At first, he didn't call. He didn't text. Not even a, "Where are you?" Just silence. And that silence cut deeper than his words ever could. Days passed, then a week, then two. I wondered if he even read the note, or if he was just glad to have the house to himself. Maybe he thought I was being dramatic, trying to teach him a lesson he didn't care to learn. I thought about calling him. Every night, I stared at my flip phone, thumb hovering over his contact, wrestling with the urge to reach out. But I didn't, not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. I wanted him to be the one to bridge the distance this time. I wanted him to feel what life was like without a safety net, without the one person who never let him fall. Meanwhile, the apartment became my refuge and my prison. I started waking up before sunrise, not because I had work, but because old habits die hard. I'd make coffee, sit by the window, and watch the world go on without me. I saw strangers rushing to jobs, parents walking their kids to school, young couples holding hands. And every morning I felt like I was watching a life I used to belong to, now playing out for someone else. The ache in my chest was constant, but it was also necessary. I needed to feel it. I needed to remember why I left. Because if I had stayed, if I had let his words slide, if I had continued to accept that kind of treatment quietly, I would have been telling him it was okay. That fathers are meant to be stepped on. That love means tolerating disrespect. And I couldn't do that. Not for him. Not for me. I got by with odd jobs, fixing plumbing in old buildings, patching drywall, unclogging drains. The work was familiar. Honest. It gave my hands something to do while my mind unraveled in circles. Some nights I'd walk by families eating dinner through lit windows and wonder if they appreciated what they had. If the kids at those tables knew the man sitting across from them was sacrificing everything to keep their world stable. I wondered if Caleb was eating dinner at all, if he had figured out how to cook for himself, or if he was living off frozen pizza and takeout like most teenagers left to their own devices. And somewhere, beneath all those thoughts, was a quiet hope that maybe he was missing me too, that maybe he had read that note and was just too stubborn to admit how much it rattled him. But the silence continued, and as the second week began, I felt something shift. The calls didn't come. The house didn't burn down. Life went on without me, and that hurt more than I wanted to admit. Because as much as I needed to be gone, a part of me feared being forgotten. I didn't want to be just a chapter he closed. I wanted him to turn the page and realize something was missing. And eventually, he did. It didn't happen all at once. It was subtle at first. Small signs that Caleb's carefully constructed world was starting to crack. It began with a voicemail, not from him, but from his school. A soft-spoken woman from the front office left a message on my phone saying Caleb had missed several classes in a row, that his grades, once decent enough, were beginning to slip. She asked if everything was all right at home. I didn't call her back. I couldn't. Not yet. But I saved the message and played it back more times than I care to admit. There was something about hearing it from someone else, someone outside our broken circle, that made it all feel more real. Caleb wasn't okay, and whether he admitted it or not, he was feeling the absence. Feeling my absence. Then came the second sign. A neighbor from our old street, Mrs. Andrews, called me one evening. Her voice carried the weight of concern. She told me the front yard was overgrown, that the trash hadn't been taken out in days, that she saw Caleb sitting alone on the porch in the evenings, staring at the street like he was waiting for something, or someone. I thanked her, told her I was handling it, and hung up. But her words stuck with me. Caleb was unraveling, and, for the first time, he had no one to fall back on. No one to quietly clean up behind him. No one to make sure things kept running smoothly. He was, in the truest sense of the word, alone. A part of me ached to go back, to rush in, fix everything, and hold him like I did when he was small and scared. But another part, the part of me that remembered the look in his eyes when he mocked me, told me to wait, not out of spite, not out of punishment, but because he needed this. Growth only comes in the quiet, uncomfortable spaces where we're forced to sit with our own mistakes. I had protected him from those spaces for too long. I had shielded him from the consequences of his words, his actions, and now he was facing them. For the first time. Then, finally, after 3 weeks of silence, there was a knock at my apartment door. I knew it was him before I even looked through the peephole. Something about the hesitation in the knock, the weight behind it. I opened the door, and there he was. My son, standing in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, dark circles under his eyes, hands buried deep in his pockets like he was trying to keep himself from falling apart. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me. And in that moment I saw it all. The pride that had kept him away, the fear that had brought him back, and the guilt that had been building inside him like a storm. "Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside and let him in. No lectures, no grand speeches, just space. I sat across from him at the small, creaky kitchen table. He looked around the apartment, at the bare walls, the cluttered tool bag by the door, the half-finished sandwich on the counter, and something shifted in his face. Maybe he realized how real this was, how serious. Maybe he thought I was bluffing before, that I'd come back after a few days like nothing happened. But I didn't. And now, he was sitting in the reality of that choice. "I didn't think you'd actually leave," he said, eyes focused on a spot on the floor. "I thought, I don't know, that you'd get mad maybe, but not this. Not disappearing." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch between us before answering. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," I said. "I left because I needed you to understand what it feels like to be taken for granted, to be laughed at, to be invisible." He looked up then. His eyes were red, wet with tears he hadn't let fall yet. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I was being funny. I didn't think it would hurt you like that." "It wasn't just what you said," I replied. "It was that you meant it, that you looked at me like I was less than, like I was some kind of embarrassment, and I couldn't sit in that house another day pretending that was okay." That was when he broke. The tears came, and he didn't try to stop them. He covered his face with his hands and let out a choked sob, the kind of cry that comes from deep in the chest, the kind that only happens when you finally understand the weight of your actions. "I miss you, Dad," he said between breaths. "I didn't realize how much you did until you weren't there." I reached across the table, put my hand on his, and squeezed. "I missed you too, son. But this was something you needed to learn on your own." And in that tiny apartment, with nothing but raw honesty between us, we began the slow, painful, necessary process of rebuilding. The days after that conversation with Caleb felt different. Lighter somehow, but also uncertain. He left the apartment that night after our talk, promising to come back, and he did, again and again. At first, just for an hour or two. Then for whole afternoons, then full weekends. He didn't bring friends with him. No loud laughter or dismissive glances. Just him and the quiet weight of a young man trying to piece things together, not just between us, but within himself. He started to ask questions he never cared to ask before. How did you learn to fix drywall? How many hours did you used to work? Did you ever want to do something else? I answered honestly, not to guilt him, not to paint myself as some kind of martyr, but because I saw a spark of real curiosity in his eyes, a hunger to understand the life I had lived, the man I had been long before he ever saw me as just Dad. One Saturday, we sat together on the floor fixing a broken cabinet door I'd been meaning to repair. He watched my hands closely as I worked the screws, measuring twice, adjusting, redoing. Then he tried it himself. The screws went in crooked at first. He got frustrated, tossed the screwdriver down. "I don't know how you've done this your whole life," he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. I looked at him, saw the same frustration I used to carry when things didn't come easy, when the world felt unfair. "I didn't have a choice," I said softly. But I made peace with that. I took pride in doing what needed to be done. He didn't respond right away. But I saw it land, the way truth does when it hits something raw and ready. That same day, he pulled out an envelope from his backpack. "I've been working part-time after school," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Just a few hours a week, stocking shelves. It's not much, but I want to start paying for my own stuff, my phone, my food, whatever." I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at the envelope in his hand. It wasn't the money that moved me. It was the gesture. The recognition, the beginning of accountability. He wasn't just trying to apologize anymore, he was trying to grow, trying to become the kind of man who understands the value of things, not just receives them. "You don't owe me money," I finally said. "But I'm proud of you for taking responsibility." He nodded, then stuffed the envelope into his backpack without another word. I think we both understood. It wasn't about repayment. It was about respect, about effort, about finally stepping into manhood not through age but through action. That evening, we ate dinner at the tiny table in my apartment. Nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and soup. But we talked like we hadn't in years. He told me he'd been struggling in school but was trying to catch up. He admitted the house was a mess, that laundry had piled up, that he hadn't realized how much invisible work I had been doing all along. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. His honesty was enough. But the real turning point, the moment everything finally aligned, came a week later. I had gone back to the house to pick up a few of my things. Caleb was already there cleaning. The place looked different. The trash had been taken out, the dishes were done, and the smell of something baking wafted through the air. I stepped into the kitchen, and for a moment I thought I was in the wrong house. "What's going on here?" I asked, smiling. He turned around with a sheepish grin, trying to keep it from falling apart. "I figured if you could do it alone for years, I can at least try now." Then he handed me something, a photo frame. It was an old picture, him and me, years ago. He must have dug it out of storage. I remembered the day it was taken. A father-son fishing trip at a nearby lake. We both had sunburns and crooked smiles. He was holding a fish half his size. I had my arm around him and we both looked genuinely happy. "I want to put this up in my room," he said. "I've been looking at it a lot lately. I forgot how much you were there. For everything." I didn't respond with words. I couldn't. I just reached out and pulled him into a hug. He didn't resist. In fact, he held on tighter than I expected. Not as a child clinging to his father, but as a young man reconnecting with someone he nearly lost to his own pride. That night, after we said goodbye, I walked back to the apartment alone. But for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful, like something had finally shifted into place. I knew we still had work to do. Forgiveness wasn't a switch. Trust wasn't instantly restored. But there was progress. There was awareness. There was growth. Caleb had seen the consequences of his words. He had lived with the emptiness they created. And now he was trying to fill that space with something real, something honest. It wasn't about me moving back home. It wasn't about lectures or punishment or control. It was about a boy realizing that love and respect are not inherited. They're earned, nurtured, and chosen again and again. And in that realization, a bridge began to rebuild between us, one board at a time. I looked at him for a long time, not with anger, not even with disappointment, but with the full weight of years, the years I spent carrying him, protecting him, sacrificing, without ever asking for anything in return. He sat across from me, eyes red, face softer than I'd seen in a long time, stripped of the arrogance and defense he'd worn like armor for so many years. And in that moment, all the pain, all the silence, all the echoes of laughter that once mocked me, they faded into the background, because I could see the boy I raised sitting in front of me, not the version trying to impress his friends, not the one who had once dismissed me, but the child I'd rocked to sleep, taught to ride a bike, and stayed up worrying about through fevers and growing pains. He was still in there, and I needed him to understand, not just the hurt he caused, but the deeper wound underneath it. So I took a breath, and with every ounce of calm I could muster, I said, "Son, I wasn't hurt because you embarrassed me. I've lived a life that most people wouldn't understand, and I'm proud of the man I've become. I'm not ashamed of who I am or what I've done to survive. I wasn't hurt by your words alone. I was hurt because for a moment, you forgot who raised you." My voice cracked at the end. Not from weakness, but from truth. From the ache that builds when love meets neglect. His lips trembled, and I saw it. The realization crashing over him like a wave. The weight of what he'd said. What he'd taken for granted, what he had nearly thrown away. He didn't try to explain, didn't offer excuses. His face crumpled and the tears came. Not silently, not in shame, but openly, like someone who finally understood what he had done. And then slowly, he stood. Without a word, he crossed the space between us and wrapped his arms around me. Not a quick hug, not one of those awkward pats on the back. This was different. This was a real, shaking, tear-filled embrace, one that felt like an apology, a thank you, and a desperate plea for forgiveness all at once. I held him tightly, resting my hand on the back of his head like I used to when he was small, and for a few minutes, neither of us said a word. Because in that silence, more was said than words ever could. In his arms, I felt years of strain begin to loosen. The unspoken tension, the missed chances, the quiet grief that comes from watching your own child drift further away without knowing how to bring him back. And now, here he was, sobbing in the arms of the man he once mocked. The man he once dismissed as simple. But in that moment, he wasn't clinging to a joke or a shadow of what he thought fatherhood should be. He was holding on to the truth. To me, I could feel the guilt in every tremble of his body, and I could also feel the change, the shift. In perspective, the humble acceptance of everything I had tried to teach him in quieter ways for so many years. I didn't want to break the hug, but when we finally pulled apart, I saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't just regret. It was understanding. There's a look people get when they've been broken open and are starting to rebuild, and I saw it shining through his tears. "Dad," he whispered, voice raw, "I don't know how to make this right." I shook my head gently. "You already started," I replied. This moment. You showed up. You listened. You saw me. That's more than I can say for a long time." He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie, sniffling like he used to when he was a little boy with a scraped knee. The air between us felt different now, not heavy like before, but clean, clear, like we'd finally let in light after years of holding back the truth. "I want to be better," he said, his voice low, but sure. "Not just for you, but for me too. I didn't realize how much I've taken for granted. I didn't see it until you were gone." I nodded slowly. "I left so you could feel the absence. Not to punish you, but to help you understand that respect, love, presence, those aren't guarantees. You have to choose them, every day. He looked down, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. Do you think you'll come home? I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure, not because I didn't want to, but because this wasn't about moving back into a house. This was about rebuilding a relationship. And rebuilding takes, maybe someday, I finally said. But what matters more is this right here, this honesty, this humility. If we can hold on to that, everything else will follow. He nodded, and this time I saw no resistance in him, no ego, just the quiet determination of someone who had been humbled and had chosen to grow rather than collapse. I reached across. The table took his hand again. We're going to be okay, I said. It won't be perfect, but we'll figure it out, together. He smiled, small but genuine. And in that moment, the years of distance, misunderstanding, and hurt felt a little less permanent. We still had work to do. But for the first time in a long while, we were working toward each other. Not away. Caleb started coming by every week. At first, it was awkward, two people relearning how to be father and son. But over time, something shifted. The conversations grew longer, less guarded. He'd bring takeout sometimes or ask if I wanted to walk to the park with him like we used to when he was younger. We'd sit on old benches, watch the trees sway in the wind, and talk, not just about school or work, but about life, about dreams, about regrets. It was in those quiet walks and simple dinners that I realized something important. Healing isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just a steady presence, a shared meal, a laugh that feels real again. We didn't talk much about the night he hurt me or the day I left. We didn't need to. The air between us didn't carry the same tension it once did. It carried understanding, respect. I saw it in the way he listened when I spoke. In the way he asked for my opinion without rolling his eyes or brushing it off. In the way he'd stay after dinner just a little longer, helping clean up even when I didn't ask. We were rebuilding what had cracked. Slowly, carefully, like someone putting back together something fragile they'd once taken for granted. I didn't return home immediately. I wasn't ready, and neither was he. There were still things he had to prove and things I had to let go of. But over time, I started leaving more things at the house. A pair of boots, a few tools, a photo, frame of us from years ago. They were small signs, but they meant something. I could feel home starting to return to us, not as a place, but as a feeling. That deep, familiar sense of safety and belonging that only comes from being truly seen and valued by someone you love. And maybe that was the point all along. Sometimes people forget the value of what they have until they live without it. We grow comfortable. We assume that the people who love us will always be there, always absorb the hits, always show up, no matter how carelessly we treat them. But love doesn't work like that, not the kind that lasts. Real love isn't about endurance, it's about choice. About showing up again and again, even after the cracks. And sometimes the most powerful lesson isn't taught through anger or punishment, but through distance. Through letting someone sit in the silence of their choices long enough to hear the echo of what they lost. That's what Caleb experienced. Not abandonment, but space. Space to understand. Space to grow. Space to feel the full weight of a father's absence, and to realize that love, when taken for granted, can slip quietly through your fingers. And me? I learned something too. I learned that strength doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means stepping away. Not out of cruelty, but out of hope. Hope that the absence will speak louder than words ever could. That, in that empty space, someone might finally hear what's been trying to reach them all along. Now, months later, our bond is different, stronger, wiser. There's a mutual respect that wasn't there before. He still calls me old man sometimes, teases me about my flip phone, but there's no malice in it now, just affection. And when he laughs, I laugh too. Because I know the difference now between being laughed at and being laughed with. That difference matters. It means everything. He's growing into a man I can be proud of. Not because he's perfect, but because he's trying, because he's choosing to be better, to be more present, to be more aware of how his actions ripple outward. And that gives me hope, not just for him, but for us, for all the relationships strained by misunderstanding or pride, or the blindness that comes from youth. So if you're listening to this, if you're carrying a hurt like I was, or watching someone you love slip away piece by piece, know this: sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to hold tighter but to let go. To step back and let the silence do what words can't. It's not easy, it hurts, it's lonely. But growth rarely happens in comfort. It happens in the spaces where we're forced to confront ourselves. And if that person comes back, if they return with eyes that see you differently, with a heart open instead of closed, then maybe that silence wasn't empty at all. Maybe it was the beginning of something better, something stronger, something earned. And if they don't come back, if they don't hear the message in your absence, then you'll still have something important: your dignity, your peace, your truth. Because love should never require you to shrink just to be accepted. You deserve to be seen, to be respected, and to be loved fully, not just when it's convenient. For me and Caleb, our story didn't end with a broken dinner or a cruel laugh. It paused there, it fractured, but then it began again. And what came next was not just healing, but transformation. I may not have returned to the same house, but I returned to my son, and he returned to me. And in the end, that's what mattered most. Have you ever been disrespected by someone you love? Someone you sacrificed for, believed in, and gave your whole heart to, only to be met with silence, mockery, or indifference? If you have, then you understand the kind of pain that doesn't always leave a bruise but leaves a mark just the same. Maybe it was a parent, a partner, a child, or even a friend. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who forget our worth the fastest. And in those moments, when the love you've poured out feels unseen or taken for granted, you're left with a choice. Do you speak up? Do you walk away? Or do you stay silent and hope they'll one day realize the weight of what they've done? If you were in my shoes, if you were the one standing in the kitchen hearing laughter that wasn't meant to be cruel but cut you anyway, what would you have done? I'd really like to know. Share your story in the comments below. Your experience, your lesson, your truth might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And if this story moved something in you, if it made you pause, reflect, or even tear up just a little, then I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because this isn't just a place for stories, it's a space for healing, for growth, and for the kind of real life lessons that don't always come wrapped in perfect endings. Sometimes they come with silence, tears, and the slow, hard work of mending what's been broken. And through these stories, we remember: love is never guaranteed, but it's always worth fighting for. So let's talk. I'm listening.